in the room, maybe we can start like looking at who's around. Over 100 participants registered for this session, and including a good representation of RURACTIVE project members and countries as well. And also we've got various profiles, as I said earlier. I don't know if you can see this correctly. I think there's a little mismatch with the graph, but it doesn't matter. So basically, this forum is a place to space and share insights and experiences with rural actors. We'll build on RURACTIVE project insights to trigger discussions and exchange, but also we rely on your participation and experience. So the first 4 sessions are dedicated to policy making. It's part of an iterative process, and we are trying to focus today on generating policy recommendations based on the project experiences as well as your own. So these recommendations will be then refined and validated in the 4th forum, which will happen on 30th of June. So I take the opportunity to welcome you all to join that last forum related to policy making. And as you have received in the previous documentation, we've got very clear objectives. So today we'll try to translate these rural challenges and systemic barriers that we all identify into proto recommendations that we can then align and frame within the current policy cycle that we currently immerse in. So very briefly, today we will start with a brief introduction of RURACTIVE projects as well as the current policy cycle. So we're all kind of on board, on the same page. And then we'll have a keynote speech regarding the Rural Pact. And then we will all be distributed in 6 parallel groups and then be back for plenary. So I'm going to stop sharing here and ask our project coordinator, Claudia De Luca, to take the microphone. So just very briefly, Claudia De Luca from University of Bologna. They are the project coordinators, and Claudia's got a background in environmental sciences, and she's currently working as a junior assistant professor at the Department of Architecture. So Claudia, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me right and see my screen?
Yes, we can both.
Good. Thank you very much, Maria, for the nice introduction, and to all AEIDL for the organization of this meeting and the facilitation that will happen in all the rooms. Thanks a lot to all the participants that join us today. It's very nice to see, so many people connected. I will try, and that's a very hard task, to basically summarize a project that is about 4 years, 28 partners, almost 7 million euro. 12 countries in 5 minutes. So you can see that that's quite of a challenge. I hope just to give you an idea, mostly like in relation to what we will be discussing later on, and maybe to some of the partners also that you're going to meet in the breakout rooms. So as Maria mentioned, I'm from the University of Bologna, and we are leading the full consortium for already a couple of years. We are now like a bit more than half of the project. That means that quite much have been done already, but still the outcome and the overall results still have to happen maybe. Beyond what it is with numbers, RURACTIVE is a lot about people. You're going to meet some of them in the meeting rooms. And it's a lot about, also engaging not just the project partner, but the local stakeholders. Like what you see in this picture is, of course, on the right, the consortium picture. On the left, an activity that we did as a kind of a test with the partners in the last project meeting we had, but it's something that our partners are then going back to their local communities to do. So in this kind of train the trainer, that was an activity specifically about biodiversity that we run. But of course, as you can imagine, there have been many other. What it is about, so a bit of background information. As you can imagine, as you may have seen in the breakout room and in the very detailed invitation and information that Maria shared with you, it's a lot about these rural development drivers. So, when we've been asked by the Commission to try to develop this concept of rural innovation in response to the call that was open in Horizon Europe, we have been trying to set it up in a way that was for us, let's say, operational, so that it kind of help us translating the ideas of what we see in practice in terms of development. So as you can imagine, among these drivers, we are of course working with sustainable agri-food. That is in most of the case the main recognized driver, no, for non-urban area, let's say. But we do work quite much, and actually we do believe that an integrated approach is the only approach we have to actually claim back people and resources in an area. So we work a lot with culture and cultural innovation, local services, health and well-being, mobility, energy, tourism, a kind of a nature-based and cultural-based tourism. And even more crucial, most probably, and I would like to highlight this, in all of this, we work with three so-called cross-cutting priorities. Those are climate change mitigation and adaptation, biodiversity, and social justice and inclusion. What does it mean that they are cross-cutting? That, of course, I mean, this example I always make when we work about energy transition, we are, of course, working on climate mitigation. But we may forget biodiversity, we may forget social justice when we implement an energy transition project. So the idea, same when we work on culture and cultural innovation, maybe we are more used to work over social justice, but we may forget climate adaptation and mitigation on the other side, or diversity aspect. So yes, of the drive, three components actually integrate in the development of solution plan for rural development. What we did so far, and this is going to be actually, I mean,
Sorry,
some
Claudia.
of this is already available in the website. A part is going to be soon. We already mapped 400 solutions that are coming from experience.
Claudia, can you hear me? We're struggling to hear you. There seems to be some connectivity problems on your side. I think there's
can
also
hear you right.
okay. I think there's also a lagging issue there. So we're struggling to hear you. I don't know if you can do anything about your connectivity.
Can you hear me better if I stop sharing the video?
Yes, now we can hear you much better. Yes.
I could always hear you, so it was very weird and very frustrating not being able to being heard. Can you see my screen back? And can you hear me right again?
We can hear you and the screen is coming up. Still loading. Now we can see it. Solutions for rural development.
So yeah, I'm sorry for the connection issue. So what we did so far is both to already upload and made available solution into the website, and as well soon there's gonna be tool available for users to navigate all the solution that we collected from previous projects relevant to the topic where we worked on. Some of you may have been involved in project that we actually map and included in the catalog. And our, when we say Dynamo, we are speaking about our case studies, I mean, the pilots, the people that are actually implementing the activities. Going on the Dynamos, because that's most of the things actually that we have been doing in the last couple of years, what they did, it was not just to give us the solution that we have been mapping, so what they were already good, what they were already doing, but they also developed a, let's say, new bunch of solutions, so-called place-based co-developed solution, meaning that they work together with their local stakeholders in the so-called RURACTIVE rural innovation ecosystem. So they mapped the stakeholder, the engagement, and then they started to brainstorm with them to develop idea and then to build concrete local action plan that they wanted to implement with their local stakeholders. This is a bit a very brief summary of the process. So they started looking at vision and challenges that they had in their area, some of these challenges have been, let's say, launched in an open call for innovators. We have external innovators that are supporting the dynamos, but as well, they work with their local stakeholders in developing their so-called place-based solution. So both the innovator solution and this place-based solution have fitted the lab, that there are the local action plan that now our dynamos are implementing. An overall vision of what we did so far. So there are now 38 place-based solutions that the case studies are implementing, plus 15 solutions coming from innovators, covering all the rural development drivers you see, not in the exact same share, but let's say, covering all the things that we wanted to work upon. Some example to be very concrete, Forza, that is our partner in Ukraine, is working over a cultural train for increasing nature-based tourism. Growbits, our partner in Scotland, is working on your local larder to support more just and equitable food provision in certain part of Scotland. And the Silver Smart Corner is a solution that is now being implemented by the Diputación de Zamora in Spain about health support to specific vulnerable group in the area of the municipality of Zamora. Some resources, you can go on the website, you can find all the very detailed local action plan of all the partners, so all the 12 local dynamos. You can go on Zenodo, there are open access datasets and deliverable, and of course, follow our social media for constant updates about things and news. I'm very sorry for the connection issue. I hope that you still managed to follow me somehow.
Yeah, this last part, which was much better. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for trying to condense such a rich and great project into 5 minutes. Now I will leave you with Serafín Pathos Vidal, who's a senior expert and lead of the Rural Territorial Development area at AEIDL, and he will be introducing why is it this the right timing to discuss policy options for the future of rural areas. And Serafín holds a PhD in European Union. He's a policy practitioner and published research in several topics, including multi-level governance, EU cohesion policies. So I will leave the floor to him.
Thank you, Maria. I will be, before we get into discussing the individual topics, which is the beef of the question today, I will be keen to give you a big picture. I mean, many of you will be broadly and aware of what is happening in the European Union, others not, but essentially the big leitmotif of at the moment is the significant reform of the EU policies and the EU budget around that and the impact in national, regional, local level. So if the technology allows, which is always an if, I will be sharing. Yes, I think it works. If I'm not mistaken, well, for once, fine, great. I'm not getting fan of Zoom compared to Teams, but there you are. Today it works. Anyway, so I'm going to be briefly discussing, like 5 minutes only, why are we having the discussion now, and why is it useful to have this discussion. And just for background, I've just been rushing out of a meeting at the European Commission where, with a number of officials from different DGs and a small group of people, we were looking about how to ensure that the current proposals can be as inclusive as possible, as territorially sensitive as possible, as part of a number of discussions that are happening at the European level right now. So I'm going to give you a very brief outline. Don't worry, there will be at the end also space for debate and questions, so bear with us. But just to give you understanding why are we then later discussing individual topics like transport or inclusion, housing, etc. So, big picture. This is an image from Mrs. von der Leyen herself that presented last July, and this is the whole EU budget. The new EU budget is 2 trillion, it's bigger than what we have at the moment. I will not go through the details. I will just say that the aim is to simplify the many streams of funding. If you've been working in local development, you will know there is like between 20 and 30 streams just for local development. Even practitioners like us struggle sometimes to tell the difference. So that's the idea, to simplify and reduce number of funds to have them more capacity. That's, of course, there are trade-offs, and there's some people concerned about that, as you will see that. I will be asking you to focus only on half of the budget, which is the budget that's going to be managed at national, regional, and local level. That's going to be called the National Regional Partnership Plans, which essentially will merge together a number of pre-existing funds. which you see in this diagram. Essentially, at the moment, there is a national regional plan for social fund, a national regional fund for regional development, a national fund for agriculture, a regional one, a national plan for fisheries, that's national one, and then a national one for migration. So the idea is to put that into a single envelope, that big block, that big blue blocks you see there. That's going to be called the National and Regional Partnership Plans. And essentially is trying to put together all these instruments to have more flexibility within the plans and also to prevent silos. Because at the moment, if you know, you've been working in local development or in public policy, sometimes this ministry doesn't talk with the other, this region doesn't talk with the ministry, and so on. The idea, at least on paper, is to make sure that this is much more natural discussion. There are actually national outcomes that can be reported to. That is the idea. The problem is that if not done correctly, might end up being centralized by default. Because if the government is clearly the one that signs off a single envelope with a single plan and is in a rush to actually finalize that sent to Brussels of money that can flowing, can easily, much easier than at the moment, just centrally impose decision, and that's something that is quite significant. And of course, when we talk about local development, which is granular and sensitive, that's something that is even more worrying. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but definitely a lot of discussion is going on at the moment to make sure that these new national plans can actually deliver in a very spatially granular way. Because otherwise, what we might have is what we call the performative partnership. And we talk about involvement of social civic stakeholders, local authority, excluded groups. But if that is not done in a robust way, and certainly at least as robust as at the moment, if not more, and ideally should be more, that actually may result that the simplification might end up being counterproductive, so to speak. So that is why avoid silos is important, but also ensuring representation is equally important. And for rural development, it is something that has been particularly relevant, as we will see. Why? Because as you can, I'm just trying to perhaps to go ahead of myself, but with the discussions here at the moment, there's significant concern on what I said, that this single plan can be a good idea, but if done not correctly, and if administrations are not used to talk with each other and don't have a collaborative culture, in some countries they don't have that, I'm afraid, that may end up being centralized. So there's a lot of pushback in the European Parliament, the Committee of the Regions, stakeholders. Member states, however, are rather happy because you're telling them, okay, you can have even more control on the funds and the policies that link to the funds that you have at the moment. So member states are actually sitting around the Council of Ministers, they're very happy with what they're doing. But the Commission itself is rather aware that there is this a bit radical change, and even if it's done with the best intentions, there's a lot of people that might risk of losing. So it has been sending a number of revised proposals, introducing a 10% for rural areas, a guarantee that 10% of this envelope for each member state will be spent in rural areas, beyond agriculture. Important to say that it's beyond agriculture, not just farming is already safeguarded. This is about rural development measures beyond agriculture itself. To introduce a new partnership principle check, essentially to make sure that member states can actually demonstrate that the different actors, social excluded groups, have been participating in the formulating of this plan, because that's, in many countries, that's the main investment policy they have. And that's why it's important that it is fair and representative. And also that they are, for countries that have regions, there should be regional chapters to reflect the international structure of the country, like Italy or Spain or Germany, Austria. In the end, there are quite a few countries. And as I say, this is safeguards that have been discussed at the moment. MEPs are about to start to be voting on this at the moment, in different stages, Committee of the Regions as well. The idea, and this is the idea, is there should be a deal on the big picture by 2027, spring 2027. Therefore, the work we are doing here, the timeliness of today's discussion is quite obvious, because we are at the very moment where discussions are being shaped. So any policy recommendations that are going to come out between now and July, which is the timescale we got, will be ideally placed. I'm not going to get into much more detail, just to say that from the leader, local development, rural development, there is a significant concern because there's not a earmark for leader or local development as a whole. So therefore, it will very much depends how this 10% for rural development is articulated. Smart villages, which is quite connected with this RURACTIVE project, but also projects from the same Horizon Europe cluster, like Smartera or Futural, are mentioned, but there is not a clear earmarking or a clear provision to discuss what smart villages are in the new programming period. I expect, however, that this is going to be changed during the course of negotiation because there's significant concern that without more specifics at European level, you give far too much leeway to member states to decide or sometimes to improvise just because they have, of course, their own pressures to deal with. Still, there's quite a lot of work to do. This is the only reference to territories in the regulations that have been tabled in the last July and the ones that we have negotiated. These are very little references, and the discussion at the moment is to make the reference to territoriality, to exclusion, far more specific than they are in the proposal. For instance, we will discuss in the transport section later the notion of transport poverty, thanks to Pedro Gómez de Gouveia from Polis. This is not included. Transport poverty is being formulated by the Commission, but it's not in the regulation. So there's going to be a lot of discussion about how to improve this framework that we have been given by the Commission or tabled by the Commission last July. Anyway, as I said, this is just a number of ideas. I will not get into detail, just saying that some of them, like the essential services, Professor Mar Ortega will discuss today. She's one of the leading voices on that, so I'm glad to have her today here. Also, the definition of rurality. We have Enrique Niete, for instance, is speaking right now on the Rural Pact. So there's a number of ideas that are happening. The situation is still in flux, and I think it's the fair point for this project to actually formulate, with your help, some reasonable, practical, actionable policy recommendations that can actually make sure that the next EU funds and the rural policies that go around it, we are financed by it, actually serve the communities that they are meant to provide. And I think I'm going to leave it there because otherwise, as always, speak too much. And I will be keen, without further ado, given that we're a bit late, and I see Maria nodding at me saying, as always, you speak too much. You are right. I think I would like to give the floor to a good friend, but also somebody with a significant responsibility at the moment. He's the director of the Rural Pact Support Office. Enrique is one of the voices on rural development and local development of here of Brussels for many decades. I know him for quite a few years before I joined AEDL. And he's at the moment, he's been having a number of roles in the past on AEDL, on the European Rural Development. And now he's responsible for no less than the Rural Pact Support Office, which is this structure, this organization that is being set up by the Commission to actually help rural voices reach decision-making in Brussels, but also making sure that rural communities that are part of the Rural Pact community understand the ideas that are being formulated from Brussels to help them exercise what we call the right to stay, among other things. I think without further ado, Enrique, if you are around, I hope you are, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Serafin, for the introduction. I will try to share my own slides.
Perfect.
Hopefully you confirm
I should
it
have
is
some
working.
place where I can put this.
Can you confirm it's working?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I was requested the task to explain a bit more about the Rural Pact and the long-term vision, which is linked to that, and a bit on the more practical aspects related to community-led innovation, in a sense, or territorial innovation. As Serafin mentioned, I'm part of ADL. My team is not involved in research. We are directly working with DG Agri and DG Regio, providing the technical assistance to animate this policy initiative coming from the Commission. So everything started with the long-term vision for EU's rural areas. In 2021, this has been an initiative triggered by the Vice President at the time, Suitzka, accompanied by Commissioners for Agriculture and Regio, and now this portfolio, this initiative is now under the competence of Vice President Fito for cohesion and reforms, and as well Commissioner Hansen on agriculture. So, as I said, now falls under Regio and Agri. What does it mean, this long-term vision for rural areas? This has been a strategy, a vision that looks at rural areas from a broad angle. So breaking a bit the sectorial approach to considering rural development, moving beyond, not neglecting, but moving beyond that, recognizing the need that there are multiple demands, multiple requirements needed in rural areas for making rural areas prosper. So the vision is, as I said, is very broad. It's structured in 4 main building blocks. So advocates for more stronger, connected, prosperous, resilient rural areas. You can see there the different topics that are handled under each of them, from empowering communities accessing to services. So this is, I guess, one of the remits that you are working on within this project. Well, you will recognize many of the topics as well, because innovation is a transversal aspect that touch upon many different sectors and themes. So voilà, from connectivity, transport links, new mobilities, economic diversification, sustainable food systems, resilience to climate change, not only, as well social resilience. We saw with COVID that one is also an important one. So you see a lot of topics. So basically, the message is the EU level has already strategy, a vision on where they want to see rural areas in 2040, and in a sense was the starting point of the approach of looking at rural areas from an integrated approach, which, as Serafin mentioned in his presentation, now it seems a bit reflected on the Commission proposal, where rural areas is falling a bit outside the cap, at least the non-sectoral policy around agriculture. And it becomes a bit as well a shared responsibility with other public administrations, with its opportunities, but as well the risk that Serafin flagged. Now, around this long-term vision, it doesn't come as a nice document. There is a concrete action plan, and within that action plan, the Rural Pact is one of its activities. The aim of the Rural Pact precisely is to try to address one of the points that Serafin mentioned in his presentation, is trying to establish links with those actors at different levels that need to step up as well and engage in rural development, breaking the silos in a sense. So we work at all levels and we try to engage all the stakeholders that are relevant for rural areas. And we have 3 main objectives. The first one is a political one. So our aim is to amplify the voices, the needs of rural areas, and try to put them higher up in political agendas at all levels. The second one is much more practical. So we aim to build capacities and to boost networking around key topics of the vision. And I will share a bit more on the concrete activities that we do. So I will try to make this presentation very, very practical so you can spot what are concrete opportunities that you might have to engage with this policy network. And the third one is to try to encourage action on the ground on these topics, so action from stakeholders on the ground on all these topics. This is an overall picture of what the Rural Pact, so you can picture it as a network. We have formal 4,000 members. I mean formal because this network you need to register through the online platform, and you have the link in my presentation, and maybe colleagues, if you have access to that link, you can put it in the chat in case some of you are not yet members of the Rural Pact. So it's a formal membership. We have members from all across Europe, but also from non-European countries, normally pre-accession countries. And its governance is very much run by the Rural Pact Support Office, which is the team I'm leading with a team of 11 experts. Our objective is to implement a number of activities to really facilitate and animate this network. Then there is also a governance body, which is the Rural Pact Coordination Group, an important grouping that is where EU institutions are part of, and our role is to coordinate it. So there you have the European Parliament, the Commission, the Council, presidencies, Committee of the Regions, European Economic and Social Committee, as well other EU and national relevant actors for rural areas. And then we just added recently something that we find very useful and perhaps you can find useful, what we call community groups. So in the platform, we organize a bit the stakeholders around their interests. So this community group basically is an opportunity for you to connect or identify those active members that are on specific topics. These are bottom-up stakeholder-led groups. So it's really for stakeholders to come or stakeholder organizations to come and say, look, I'm interested to build a community and around this topic and keep them informed about events, news, have discussions with them, collect good practices, find partners for projects, etc. So you see all the topics, many of them are relevant to the topics that you are dealing with. And I flagged smart villages perhaps as one that is much more probably focused on the community-led innovation, although as I mentioned, innovation is very much cross-cutting. Just to give you an idea, I think the smart villages community at the moment has around 200 members. It is a precondition that you have to be a member of the Rural Pact to really join this community group. So that's why it's important that you formally join the community group to get advantage of these networking opportunities. In the Rural Pact Support Office, I'm not going to get into detail. We do a number of activities, and I enter into that now. For this year, we have two main focuses. It's a particular moment. It's a very important moment that will define the future of rural areas. So in the Rural Pact, we're going to put emphasis on building the capacities of stakeholders to be able to participate and contribute in the design and implementation of the NRPPs. So a lot of the work that we are going to do this year goes along that. Therefore, we will have probably political events, policy activities, and others that are much more thematic to really share experience with the stakeholders so they build their capacities on those topics as well to be able to then reflect those needs, those opportunities in the discussions on the future NRPPs. So I mentioned already the community groups. You are very welcome to register. Of course, a core part of the activities we do is these events that we organize with the support of the European Commission. On the one hand, we have what we call good practice webinars. These are much more practitioners-led focus, sharing good practices on particular topics. So I'm on I don't know if you see the left or the right. So the green side, you have the events that are tentatively planned for this year. So yesterday, we just had one good practice webinar where we touch upon leader integrated territorial investments and smart villages. The next one we're going to have on the 10th of June will be dealing on, generational renewal, or if you want it as well, the succession in businesses that are beyond farming, so non-agricultural businesses. There are plenty of businesses working at the moment as well in rural areas, providing a lot of services. The owners are getting retired and there is not someone to take over. So we are going to touch upon that, and the expression of interest to join it's open now. And there would be other two events on rural competitiveness, and the third one would be on rural resilience. As I said, very practitioners-led focus, and probably some of you might find the interest to join. Again, innovation is something cross-cutting in all these topics. And then we have more policy-oriented events. And the first one we're going to have is actually the date is not correct there. We changed it. It's on the 3rd of June in Brussels. The registration is open. And here we're going to look at how to anchor rural areas, rural development in the future NRPPs, considering, as I said, the background that Serafin just shared with you on what is the state of the proposals. This is what's happening this year at the moment confirmed. It's likely as well that we will have another important event with the Council at the end of the year, likely in November, but this still needs to confirm. If you become a member of the Rural Pact, you will get informed when these opportunities come. Now, I also put our past events because you will find probably very useful information there, because there are a lot of presentations, material, videos, etc., as well on the good practice webinars. We have dealt with issues around housing, tourism, innovation. We dealt recently about that. health, energy, youth, climate, name it. So a lot of topics. So you can explore, navigate the website to and make use of all that material. Now, the Rural Pact, we are not in our EU bubble in Brussels. We have a network of 28 national partners. They're helping us to animate and mobilize this network. But also, which is a novelty on the new support office that started in 2026, is we are going to move much more closer to the member states. So we are going to organize particular events in, there is another mistake there, it's not Lithuania, it's Latvia. Latvia, Poland, France, Belgium, Flanders, Hungary, and likely Finland. Okay. So again, if you're from those countries and you want to join these events, become a member of the Rural Pact so you get the information. Publications is another part of it. We just published recently a publication, a good practices brochure on place-based innovation, which you might find useful. But we also publish a magazine and policy briefings. And I will enter a bit more on the policy briefing because this is a policy forum. But the next one, for instance, is going to be on place-based, on housing. And I saw that this could be as well a topic you are dealing with. So don't keep in touch with that so you get these publications. Now, an important policy document that we did was on year one on how to translate the Rural Pact in the member states. And probably here what we define is 7 ingredients. It's not exactly about translating the Rural Pact, but it's about what are the elements and the conditions that need to be in place in order to have an appropriate policy support for rural development or for the development of rural areas, not to confuse it with the second pillar of the CAP. And here the ingredients are around, having a transversal vision strategy in the member state, in the regions that will enable you then to design the NRPPs, perhaps to coordinate. Rural proofing has been seen as an important element that help you to look at other policies and try to build this coordination. Governance system, coordination is a key word for the future among public authority, but it's not everything just at the policy level. There has to be mechanisms to engage with the stakeholders, with communities working on innovation, so that these needs can be reflected in the policy choices. But as well, capacity building. There has to be programs, support to build the capacities of local actors to be able to respond from their local level to their needs at the capacity that they have. And I think this is very much linked as well to innovation. Capacity building is very important in innovation, particularly if we think about areas that are lagging behind, where there is not so much social capital, technical capacity to be able to deal on their own on some of the issues they have on key topics like digitalization, mobility, culture. So capacity building is very important in order to avoid that instead of closing the gaps between rural areas as well, that we might be increasing the gaps because those that have the capacity will become smart villages, will do a lot of innovation. Those that do not have the capacity will not be able to. So you can take this document as a reference, perhaps for discussion, some of the recommendations you can build from your own perspective. I need to rush, but we are not leaving all at the conditions that need to be in the member state. Also, there has to be a connection on the ground. So that's why we also have a second policy briefing on what are the ingredients, the conditions to empower communities to really be able to contribute meaningfully to the development of rural areas. You can get more details in the document. Finally, probably I've seen that you're working a lot on the ground with concrete innovations. We in the Rural Pact, we want to give visibility on the amount of initiatives that are happening at local level. So here you have the opportunity, if you are a member, to showcase your initiative. So it appears in a commission branded website. You can use it. You can brag that around, saying like we are in a commission. But for us, it's very useful, really, to make a point that there is a lot of going on in rural area. There is a lot of activities in many different fields going on in rural area, and that this needs to be taken into account in policy making. So we try to help you, and you posting your initiatives here, you try to help us and the rural communities as a whole. Well, of course, basic things, good practice. I've seen that you have done a big repository of innovative practices. We will try to put it in our good practices database. You have also our database there with other good practices. And of course, we work a lot on sharing news, keeping you up to date with policy development, with key issues happening on different thematic areas. So again, if you're a member of the Rural Pact, you receive the monthly newsletter where we will digest all that I just said to you, and you don't need to do much more than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you for rushing at the end, but we know we're a little bit delayed and we don't want to lose any of our participants as well as speakers. And we can see so many opportunities to act for rural areas. So thank you very much for sharing all those possibilities. Very quickly, we're going to be organized into the breakout sessions. So be aware that we have kind of distributed the people based on their preferences, but as well to keep the groups a little bit balanced. So some of you might have been allocated to your second preferred choice. So we are going to be now in the facilitator, like in the breakout group, for a bit less than 1 hour, and you'll be with the corresponding facilitator. So please, facilitators, remember to record your breakout session. So Miranda, if you can, send us to the other side, and we'll be back in the plenary in 1 hour.
Hi, everybody. I would disagree, Serafin. The Portuguese and the Gallegos always speak too much. It's in our blood, and it's good, no? I would say. So first of all, nice to meet you all. Thank you very much for the invitation. For a quick to present myself, my mom always told me not to speak to strangers. Well, my name is Pedro. I work for Polis, as Serafin said. Polis is the leading network of the European citizen regions advancing transport innovation, specifically innovations that can make local and regional mobility more safe, sustainable, and equitable. So not innovation per se, and also not only technological innovation. You know, there's a huge part of innovation that must be about policies, strategies, values, priorities, etc. And that's what we're particularly interested in. So it's very good to be here with all of you, and thank you very much for the invitation. You know, when I got Serafin's invitation, I looked, you know, come and give some policy-oriented ideas. I mean, I worked for 21 years at the local level, and when I came to Brussels, what I usually see is that in terms of European policy, we use around terms as if, you know, everybody knows what this means, right? Competitiveness, everybody knows. Green Deal, everybody knows. And it's not the truth. And I think we really have to try to make the concepts more explicit, because otherwise they will be used in a way that is not very helpful. Also, I see a lot of policy jargon. And I think when we have policy discussions, if we want to be democratic and really include as much stakeholders as possible, we have to steer clear from the jargon and express the problems in real life terms, and also real life solutions, because otherwise we won't get to real life solutions. Also, I see a lot of discussions being, you know, problem oriented. I think we need discussions that are solutions oriented, practical, operational. And finally, I see a lot of fixed ideas. So my desire today is to mix up whatever you have fixed in your head, and that's my humble contribution. So to speak about sustainable mobility is to speak about shared mobility in part, and cycling and public transport. And to really understand the importance, I think it's critical to discuss transport poverty. So about all this, maybe 5 key ideas to feed and fuel your discussion. First of all, number 1, transport poverty, how to define it. Well, I'm not an expert, but here's a practical way to define it. Because most policymakers are not transport experts either. So transport poverty is something that affects households and individuals that need to move in areas of low density and or need to move in off-peak times and or have a disability, motor, sensory, or cognitive disability. And these 3 characteristics, so to speak, take away choice, because in the context where they need to move, they don't have much choice. And they are, because they're in low density areas and in off-peak times, there is low service in terms of public transport. It's like that, that's public transport. It's the characteristic of public transport. We can try to improve it, but the 60-seat bus will always be a 60-seat bus. Mass transit will always require high densities to be highly performative. It's a characteristic. So don't blame it on the bus. We don't have much choice also because of dangerous roads. They distribute risk disproportionately. So anybody who's driving a car is much safer than anybody else who tries to walk or to cycle or to use public transport in these areas, particularly at night, and because of barriers to accessibility. So if you have a motor disability, you can live in an area which is not rural, but with dense public transport offer, but because of barriers to accessibility, you basically have almost nothing. So I would define public transport poverty this way. This is important to define it this way, because then you understand, number two, that poverty, we call it poverty, not because it affects the poor. It affects everybody who is in these conditions. It hurts less to those who have a higher income, but it affects everybody. It makes people poorer. That's maybe why it's called poverty. Because everybody who is in one of these conditions is faced with a tough choice, either spending too much money on private car ownership or spending too much time on public transport, or simply on any activity that requires being transported. My partner grew up in a rural area and she works in transport. And she says, every time I hear, oh yeah, in rural areas, there you have to use a car. I was a young woman growing up in a rural area. I mean, I couldn't use a car. My mom couldn't use a car. We were stuck at home. So even if cars tend to be more used in rural areas, is not because there's a solution there. It's simply because they solve the life of some part, but they leave a lot of people still without a solution. The third point here is that to solve this, the real step is to make the transportation menu richer. Because the more, and it's the same thing as with our meal, we have to make our eating menu richer, diverse. So through diversity, the more diverse we make the transport menu, the more versatile it will be, because we have different trips. We need to make different trips for different purposes at different times of day, from different locations to different locations. So there's a lot of diversity. And the problem is that the transportation monoculture, either a car or public or a bus, really doesn't serve this diversity well. So the more diverse this transportation menu is, the more versatile it will be, meaning the more capable it will be to address different transportation needs, which means it will enable people to find the best fit between their specific needs and whatever offer is there to use. And the best fit means three things: that the transportation system will become more efficient. If it's more efficient, it will become more affordable to the users and to the state, because it's the public sector that has to compensate all the shortcomings of the transport market. And thirdly, it will become reliable and competitive. The fourth idea is that shared mobility is the key. As I said, a bus is a bus. Mass public transport will always have its shortcomings in low density areas. That is not to say that it doesn't have a place there. It means that we need more. Again, a diverse transportation menu. And so shared mobility is key for that. But again, one of those terms, shared mobility, that gets thrown around. Well, what is it? Well, it's basically either sharing vehicles, meaning you have a vehicle that is used for different trips by different people, or sharing trips, meaning there's a trip where you aggregate users in the same trip. And the important change that we find is that digital technology, a best match, is enabled to grow, to benefit from the network effect, meaning there's a network of, there's offer, there's demand, and there's digital technology that matches offer with demand. And this is a great advance because it enables us to grow the amount of people to get a ride. You don't depend on anybody you know. You can depend on strangers who are matched with you through these platforms. So it extends enormously the universe of the potential offer of rides, and it extends enormously the universe of the potential demand for rides, and it matches them. So it enables the transport system to benefit from the network effect, meaning the more people in the network, the better the system works, which is actually the opposite of private car ownership, because the more cars there are, the more congestion you get. Nobody benefits, not even the car drivers. So it's the other way around. There are 4 examples. Don't worry, Serafin, I won't go much longer, that I'd like to point out. 3 examples, sorry. Number 1, carpooling. Carpooling, I think the main thing we have to say and to make clear to everybody and be a policymaker at the local, regional, and European level is that carpooling is not hitchhiking, on the side of the road. It's the opposite. So it is composed by 4 elements: by the offer, meaning people who are driving a car and going somewhere; by the demand, meaning people who need a ride; by platform, a digital platform that connects them; and by a public intervention or element. So the thing about this is a well-structured system where there is no anonymity, where both the rider and the driver have rights, and where the public sector has a role. So it's the opposite of hitchhiking that works by chance, based on, solidarity or charity, or does it suit me or does it not? It's a well-functioning transport system. So the offer gets paid, the driver gets paid. The demand, meaning the people who look for the ride, they pay much less than they would pay if they were doing the same trip in their own car. The platform matches them, and the public sector shapes the system. Does it work along lines of commuting, like in the region of Île-de-France? Does it work from everywhere to everywhere, like in many other rural areas? There's a world of options there. The public sector, the local authority, for example, shapes the system, launches the system, pays for key elements of the system. And for example, just to give you an example, let's say the person giving the ride will get paid €4 to give the ride because he's also going there. The person who gets the ride will pay €2, and the local authority will pay the remaining 2 to incentivize the system. So if we would really want to launch a fast, well-functioning service to deal, for example, with the rise in fossil fuel prices that we're experiencing now, and that we will experience again and again and again in the future, well, we don't need to spend 5 years buying the buses, hiring the driver, and getting all the money. The cars are there, the drivers are there. You just need a digital platform and the system to work with it, and then you put some short money to get the system rolling. Another example is, do I have 2 more minutes, Serafin? Yeah. Another example of shared mobility is car sharing. Again, car sharing is not about letting strangers use your car. You can use a specific fleets, for that effect. And these specific fleets can be they can be public, they can be private companies, for-profit companies. They can be, car sharing installed in new residential buildings, where the same way you have the elevator to go up and down, the neighbors can share the car to go horizontally to do these small things. It can also be using the cars of individuals. So for example, in some rural areas where you have lots of tourism, you get people who put their cars available to be on a short rental, that's car sharing, by the tourists. Or you have, in some other areas, a local government which is making its public fleet of cars available during the weekend or outside office hours. So again, the assets are there. Again, I'm saying this as a former local official. We really need to go fast with solutions. We can't just wait 5 years to buy the assets, get the money, get the loan, hire the drivers, etc., etc., etc. Shared mobility enables us to jump forward much faster. And finally, there's the element of cycling. The point here to make is that, I mean, everybody knows cycling, but the key thing I think that everybody misses is, number one, electric bikes have revolutionized cycling. Electric cycling, let me put it this way, is radically different from cycling. Everybody can go up hills. Everybody can cover 10, 12, 15 kilometers easily. It's not the same thing as cycling. Allow me to be provocative in this way. It's a whole different ballgame of potential as well. So, I mean, it can cover so many distances. Number two, cycling is also not about the bike. There's all sorts of bikes and tricycles and bikes with 4 or 5 wheels with all sorts of stuff. So the typical idea of cycling, we have to go beyond it. Understand, for example, that there are cargo bikes of all shapes, and that these cargo bikes can be very helpful for SMEs in these liberal professionals in these areas. I mean, a cargo bike can do deliveries, can carry a nurse that is doing a home support for the elderly, to carry the stuff there for physiotherapists, for all sorts of stuff. You can use cargo bikes for everything. So cycling is different. And finally, because there are different types of you can use leasing, there are fiscal support opportunities. So it's not only about, you know, having my own bike and that's it. There's all sorts of opportunities. It's a world of possibilities, cycling these days. And finally, I think we not to come in with a neoliberal discourse. I do think we have to look at transport poverty as an example of market failure. And I think that we really have to, if we're talking about policy, we have to really defend the obligation of the public sector to step up and to make the market work. Markets don't work by themselves. And when there's market failure, well, it's for the public sector to come in and to shape the market to make it work. So there's, I would like here to leave a few ideas. I mean, number one, I think it's critical that we support the participation of local actors in the transport market, or to, so to speak, to support the entry in the transport market of local actors, for profit or non-profit. Number two, many of these can be social sector actors, not because of the poverty. The emphasis on the social here is not because of the poverty, it's because of the behavior change. Behavior change is a social process, and local organizations, for profit, non-profit, I don't care, they are well connected. They are the ones best placed to support and incentivize behavior change. Three, to talk about incentives, public incentives, because the deployment of shared mobility services in lower density areas is not commercially appealing and involves risk. So there is a role for the private sector, but the public sector has to make it safer and has to also provide the same compensation. It's not about subsidies, it's about the compensation that it provides to public transport. We have to think about how best to do it. And one opportunity is because public incentives attract private investment by making it safer. So with a small public investment, we can attract private investment to make these services run. And finally, because digital technologies today enable the use of micro incentives targeted to specific types of people, types of household, types of trips, hours of trips, locations of trips, purposes of the trips. So it's a world of possibilities, specifically of targeting what we want to do. So in the end, you know, we have to, as somebody once said, you know, we have to start where we are, use what we have, and do what we can. I think we talk about local development. Obviously, this is it. It's using endogenous resources, first of all. I think that this new approach to transport poverty and to poverty is calling for a new approach that is based on the strengths and endogenous resources, and that we should build on them. That's it. I hope it helps.
I'm Maria from Lisbon, from Portugal, and I'm very pleased to join you and I need to thank you, all the organizing team and the partners, all, because I participated in the first and second meetings of RURACTIVE and always in the policy learning and all the webinars since 2021 with my research, with my doctoral project. And is a great opportunity and is a very difficult task, but I will do my best to be simple. And I think now you are seeing, yeah. I choose this title, The Rustic Model has a Framework for Intercultural Mediation. This is the subtitle about my doctoral work. I delivered my thesis on this year, 2 months ago. So, that's the reason I felt very pleased to receive this invitation. I know some people here, so it's always a great pleasure. How to sustain cultural innovation in rural areas? Well, first of all, I felt the need to rethink culture and cultural innovation. Well, in my work in the last 4 years, I felt that usually we talk about culture in silos, like cultural sectors, creative, artistic, and this always is true. But in the case of my research, when we need to create links and to translate European, national, regional to local developments, when our focus is in community-led innovations, that is my approach also. I focus in youth-led initiatives, but of course that young people, they deal in communities and intergenerational dialogues are super important. So in my case, in my work, I work with culture, very, very integrated with in a macro has society. Well, in my thesis, is more important to understand how people work together and how they understand, how they build common meanings about complex concepts, has rural innovation, has sustainability, all the concepts that Enrique and Claudia shared with us previously. Well, so if culture, we can understand culture has an interactive and integrative way of understanding and creating common meanings, and Jane talked about the common framework, and I think my contribution can be in that sense, and I will explain it very briefly. Well, how can we understand cultural innovation if culture is not a sector, and if we can understand it has a systemic vision about how people relate with people, how people relate with institutions, and how people relate with nature, when we remember that we are dealing not only with social issues, but also ecological, when we think with biodiversity, challenges, and all the energetic crises that we are facing nowadays. So when I talk about cultural innovation, is not only about producing cultural initiatives, but about how we can have a common ground to transform and to create a common language, a common framework, to be able to make proposals to policymakers. So the interface between science, policy, and society, that in academia we all struggle with that also. So, and for me, it's perfect to be on the ground, because my thesis is action research. I will not talk about this concept, knowledge commoning, but I make one connection between knowledge commoning and intercultural mediation, in the sense that we know that we have rural areas that are sometimes lagging, as Eric told us, and the rural-urban partnerships, they are a very interesting theoretical way of thinking, but in practice we know that we still work in silos, even in policy, rural policies, urban policies, and there are a lot of intercultural difficulties. So how we can create new forms of social, I will show you here, because this is the most important here, how we may create new forms of social and collective production of knowledge, thinking in the language and all the concepts that local communities sometimes struggle. I will share with you insights from local communities because I work in the ground. Although this is one PhD research, I always start by the ground, even with the Rural Pact. I'm a Rural Pact member. I participated in policy learnings, webinars since the beginning, and sharing all the theoretical framework that I developed. So now I will share the practical. And we know that my focus is about social innovation, and social innovation is in rural contexts with youth. So we know that most local, when we think in local level, most local social innovations are like butterflies. I like this metaphor, and sometimes I made one connection with cultural innovation initiatives also, because in the case of social innovation, we know that it remains rare to find explicit references in concrete policy instruments, even in when we are talking about rural development drivers. Well, and I make a kind of connection with the challenges that RURACTIVE made with Dynamos about aging and out-migration, with young people migrating for urban places or other countries, loss of cultural knowledge. This is super important. Also, biocultural memories and identities of the local places, weak visibility of rural assets, and we know governance and coordination gaps. So how I choose those two questions from the background document Jane talked in the beginning. There are, I saw 4 or 5 questions, but in my case, I choose those ones because, as I told you, my focus is on social innovation. And my great ambition is to contribute to how to measure in a qualitative basis, because we know, and that is the great differentiation that I think my work can contribute, but is a small contribution. So we need to rethink about it because it's not an end point. The rustic model and the tools that we developed are just the beginning. That's the reason we are here today with you. And the main question is what mechanisms could support sustainable cultural and creative opportunities when we think about social innovation and the local development. And of course, when we want to link local with national and European issues, when about policy agenda and all the reforms that we heard before. So what forms of European support could strengthen the preservation and the transmission of local cultural knowledge? Well, we know that we need, for sure, integrated cultural innovation strategies. We have a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives, a great examples that it is possible to make happen, but is not sufficient. We are dealing with that struggling. So I will share some results about the rustic model. It starts with the theoretical. You are seeing this hexagon with 6 main dimensions. I don't have time, it's just a brief outline, but you are seeing civil society, knowledge and skills, infrastructures, entrepreneurship, political and institutional context, and funding. And these are kind of the key dimensions, and inside each dimension, we have 5 sub-dimensions. I can give one example. In infrastructures, we can think in transport, security, digital connectivity, housing, health. In civil society, we can think in lifelong learning. We can think in diversity of incomes when we think in artistic initiatives, for instance. And you asked me, well, what is the connection with cultural innovation? Well, for me, culture is the driver that connects and is present in all of those boxes. I applied those 6 dimensions. I applied the first tentative of the European Innovation Scoreboard to measure social innovation in a national perspective. But then I was very critical because we need to try to measure not with experts, not only with experts, but with local community, and it's very hard using language so difficult. So that's the reason I created this card game, the game of left behind territories. You are seeing each box, each dimension. Here is civil society. In blue, you have the institutional context. Well, this game is a space for a common ground, as Jane Sinerma told. And the main differentiation is not only talking, is not only to identify priorities, but is to try to quantify the quantification, because we know that we still struggle about coherent indicators. We just have quantitative indicators, and if we want to measure resilience, if we want to measure social innovation in qualitative, with qualitative and subjective perspectives from local communities, the gender profiles, the age profiles, the income, the intersection initiatives between cultural, artistic, with agriculture and farming initiatives. Are you hearing? I'm listening something. So this game, here on the left side, I tested this game in 6 different contests. 3 with just homogeneous group, with young people with 20, 25 years, so very young people. And I just give you one example, more than 90%. This group was one international group from Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Croatia. And 90% of the 22 young people that tested the game with me, they told me that they do not have confidence in their local government. So, we created several mechanisms with the game to try to not only create interrelations, not only to create intersubjective meanings, but also to create indicators that is quantify based in qualitative results. And that is very challenging, but we think that this is the beginning and that we need to experiment. I can say you that in the box of civil society, the most talked sub-dimension was civic experimentation. But for that, we argue that we need intercultural mediation. It's not possible to dialogue and to create meanings because we are dealing with the complex context. I can give you the 5 examples here in the civil society. We have civic experimentation, we have social capital, we have natural capital, we have social economy, and we have the challenges about migration, the flows about migration. So what you are seeing here on the left side, because I want to be brief and then we can talk with more emphasis and details, we create the game Then with the game, we make some exploratory statistical analysis with all the tests. I tested with young people, but in 3 homogeneous groups in mainland Portugal. The focus was in Portugal, but since the beginning, I am sharing the results not only here in the European level, but also with other partners, even in Africa. For instance, I received some invitations to talk about these tools to Mozambique, for instance. So I think that intercultural mediation is a sign that maybe is interesting to try to test, because this is not one size fits all. What you are seeing here, we need simple things, is true, and we can use colors. Those are the 6 dimensions, and we developed a kind of a scale, exploratory scale, based on the statistical analysis that we made, to try to understand in each context what were the main dimensions and the main struggles, the main indicators that people, qualitative indicators, and then using Likert scales, how we can measure, and using color signs. For instance, the green one is a high. This is just one example, is not a result. We made this just to show that the main model that you saw in the beginning can be transformed with colors to try to communicate and to see in each local context what are the main dimensions, priorities that are low in level of capacities. And capacities is the key word here. As Eric told you, this work, my doctoral work, leads with capabilities approach, how to measure the capabilities. So, and for that, until now, the scale that I am talking does not measure opinions, but try to measure, as I said you, levels of shared understanding between local communities, and then we can we'll create databases, because we need to monitoring. Is not in the last 4 years I participated in several initiatives, and sometimes it seems that we still miss tools that can try to make what we are proposing, quantifying qualitative results, and using colors and simple communication tools to try to connect the local communities' challenges in the ground and policy with policymakers, and trying to, and we know that making these multi-scales is a very struggling way, but is possible if we try to access territorial capacities with those participatory tools. I tested with people with 84 years old. One woman with 84 years old played this game, was a farmer, and I can give you one example with the concept of natural capital. She was struggling with that concept, but then when I start to talk about and giving examples about the seeds and all the natural resources that she worked being a farmer, then she starts to talk with the other participants with 20, with 30. So is possible. Of course, that we will have limitations, but we need to create, I think, common languages, maybe glossaries at each local level, to try to create that quantification of qualitative results and indicators. And you asked me, but what type of indicators? Well, we have the sustainability agenda 2030. We are very near of 2030, but the sustainability agenda has a lot of indicators. But what I saw in the ground is that young people, even people from academia, sometimes youth, mainly in the university, they do not know the sustainability agenda. So maybe we can try to creating linking between community assessments, those qualitative and subjective indicators, with official statistical data. Maybe we can try to interconnect subjective local perspectives with objective metrics. So this is a kind of one stimulation to the first questions. These mechanisms, the game of left behind territories, for instance, can be a mechanism to try to minimize the spatial injustice or the geographical blindness is one concept from one researcher from Nordberg that I think is very interesting. And to support this, we need to keep alive, of course, that there is a difference between policies designed for the territory and policies produced with the local communities. So, and this game, it starts with the model, more theoretical, then we develop the game. From the game, we develop the scale and the index to try to create more easy tools to understand with colors and to try to communicate with different people, not only young people, but the local stakeholders. And in the European level, with the actual reforms, we need to try to do not lose the way and the connections, because otherwise maybe we are trying, we will deal with more injustice. So we need to keep alive those integrative, interactive practices by experimentation. In this sense, quantification, and that is my main message, quantification of qualitative results, subjective results. I can give you examples. In a local context, sometimes we want indicators as the number of projects, the number of participants, the number of partnerships. In my perspective, that is not sufficient. We need to try to create other indicators. Sometimes we will struggle because we know that is subjective, but is precisely what I argue, based in other researchers, of course, that we need to deal with intersubjectivity, and that, in my understanding, that is intercultural mediation. Is very difficult, but we are here and we are with you to try. We need to make more tests. I hear future tests, we need to expand the tests, because I made 9 tests in 9 different territorial contexts in mainland Portugal. But we propose to make other tests in other European contexts, in Italy, Greece, maybe in the north of Europe, to try to see patterns or differences. And this capacity building for policy learning. And this policy learning is not only for local communities, is also for policymakers. And because sometimes we think that local communities, in the tests that I developed, even with people, the oldest person that I tested the game was 84 years old. So it is possible to create communication and mediation channels with senior people, with young people, and try to create intergenerational dialogues. It's not easy, but I argue that we need to create social innovation support units in each local, but of course that local is not sufficient. And those local units must be joined at the regional level. And in Portugal, we are still dealing with some challenges in that regional level. So we need to expand our testing and validation, and we need to try to maybe expand and explore the technology, how technology also can help us with all the challenges also in that intercultural mediation, because maybe if we create one digital evolution of the rustic game and all the tools has the scale, and maybe we can try to facilitate that testing and validation. Those are more questions. This is the work in progress. In my case, I already delivered my thesis, but I see my thesis as an open and work in progress, and I hope to give a future with you. So, thank you very much.
So my role is to just give you a heads up on some of the issues that kind of sit around and contribute to the food sustainability issues that we currently face. Just so that you have an idea where I'm coming from on this, just a few words of introduction. I actually grew up in a food business, and I come from a farming family too. So food has been a part of my life throughout, but I've done several jobs, as you can see, around the topic. Probably most significantly in terms of this topic was I spent 10 years working for Slow Food, sort of advising and shaping their approach to sort of food system change and food system sustainability. So what I wanted to do was to start with definitions. What is a sustainable agri-food system? It is one that produces food in a way that balances, and if you take away only a few things, one of those things I want it to be is the word balance, because sustainability is not coming from just one perspective within the food system. It's coming from the point of view of balancing environmental, economic, and social objectives, because our food system has to be as well as environmentally sustainable, and that's understandably a big focus of what we're going to be talking about today. It also needs to be economically and socially sustainable, producing goods in policy terms in both those domains, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. In setting a definition, there are many definitions you could use for agri-food system sustainability. What I've drawn into this slide is the one that's used within the RURACTIVE system, and it seemed the most appropriate. And you can see that bringing nature-based solutions and digital solutions is very much a focus for RURACTIVE, being a sort of policy and future-focused initiative. But all of that is set in the context of what they're trying to achieve is what probably most definitions of sustainable food systems would actually state. It's about the phrase at the bottom: healthy ecosystems, resilient rural economies, social well-being, and sustainable livelihoods. So where does that definition sit? Within RURACTIVE, the definition has been set with sort of within the rural development driver. So it fundamentally is seeking to connect agri-food production systems with the natural environments within which they sit. Secondly, it is seeing the need for a transition. So this is not just about small changes, it's about a major transition. And that requires systemic innovation. But it also recognizes that this remains a major challenge and that agroecological systems will be key. So what what's within scope of the food system. And do forgive me for those of you who know this so very, very well. But it is important when you're thinking about food systems to ensure that you are broad in your scope, because when you're thinking about how you bring about change, it isn't always the producer, the consumer, who are the most significant. There are intermediaries and influencers who actually have a very big impact, and it's engagement of those. Firstly, identification correctly of who's influencing the food system, who's taking decisions, and then how do you find influence? And going back to RURACTIVE, what RURACTIVE sees is that a sustainable food system, if it's working, it's a positive feedback system. So the more you get the different components of the food system working in a sustainable way, there's a positive feedback. There's more employment, more income opportunities, etc. So unpacking those definitions, what makes a food system sustainable? And with this, as with a number of the slides I'm going to sort of share with you from now on, I'm not going to read everything that's on it. It's there as a reference point, and we can go back to it as we go through the discussion. You're very welcome to take photos of individual slides if you want to do so as a means to help you take notes and remember things. But as I was saying before, it's about balance. And if you're going to have a sustainable food system, you need to think about all these things. And how you affect them is different in different domains. And so thinking about influencing and working towards change, you need to think about an ecosystem of influence. So it's not just about, right, we'll have a policy initiative and everything will be fixed. That's not going to do it on its own. You need to influence decision makers. You need to influence consumers. You need to influence producers, suppliers. There's a very wide set group of people that need to be engaged for solutions to be practical. So, in looking for solutions, RURACTIVE identifies systemic innovation. So what I've done is I've now brought out one or two things on systemic innovation, and I'm going to move through this fairly quickly now. So this comes from an organization called Nesta, who are very good at sort of providing tools for strategy and policy development. And what they have identified, and if you look at numbers 3 and 4 on this chart, what I think we may well do quite a lot of today is think about these pioneering practices, new ideas, new initiatives that might have a positive impact. But we need to think then about how do you get to the tipping point? So the tipping point is where you achieve the change. So not only is it, do we have a great idea, but it's also, how does that great idea get scaled up? How does it move out of the lab, if you like, and into the field? So just reminding you, the RURACTIVE approach is about collaboration. It's about being place-based. So the questions that we're going to be covering in this discussion that Blanca will facilitate for us in a few moments are these. How do we connect farming with its natural environment? So that place-based approach. How do we work to help farmers both appreciate and work with the grain of the natural environment within which they sit? what can help farmers to shift to regenerative practices? So this is about that tipping point that I talked about. How do we make local food systems stronger? They are making a contribution at the moment. They're more visible than they are effective. How do we make them as effective as they are visible? Things like community-supported farming, things like farmers' markets. And how do we make digital tools work for all farmers? There's better digital adoption in some areas than there is in others. How do we get everybody on board that bus? And then there's the reward for real environmental results. Currently, is the incentive system delivering as it should? So I'm not going to read this slide. This is deliberately full because these are some of the additional issues that really, if you're going to think about that ecosystem of influence to bring about positive change in the food system, to increase its sustainability, these are some of the issues that need to be part of your thinking. And we also need to be aware there's a big pushback. Currently under discussion, deregulation of GMOs and seeds. And this is part of a broad, I call it an attack because that's what it is, on moves towards sustainability. And so when we're thinking about influencing change, we need to be thinking about the reality of where stakeholders are. And I was just struck, this is from the Financial Times this weekend, how if you look at that paragraph, it's saying actually what they call the Green Revolution from the 1950s onwards has brought about enormous change, and in many parts of the world, and many parts of our societies, broadly still seen as very positive. And so trying to unpack how we move towards sustainability when we have that backcloth is a real challenge. It's not impossible, but it's sort of the fact that we've got all these kind of forces ranged against moving towards sustainability is part of why progress is somewhat limited. So these are just a few innovations you might consider. Again, I'm not going to go through them, just ideas for you to think about. And then just a few concluding questions. Is your area ready for systemic change? Some may be, and those areas can actually lead the way. Don't forget consumers, they can play an important part in this. Who's in your tent? Do we have enough frameworks, or are we spending too much time developing frameworks and not enough time out there creating action? And then finally, have you got communication lines open to all parts of the agri-food system? One of my experiences with Slow Food was that certainly in the early days, it's less true now, there were certain parts of the food system they regarded as the enemy, and they didn't want to talk to. They're starting to get over that now because they realise that actually you have to have open lines of communication, or otherwise you're not going to move things forward. And then don't forget the tipping points.
So what I'd like to try and argue is 4 points. First, that renewables are the future, that renewable potential is rural, but that the question is what we do with that. And local citizen political support, I think, is crucial. And how this will affect rural areas, but more generally society, really depends on how profits are distributed. So let me say why renewables are the future. Renewables are just extremely cheap, scalable, and fast. And compared to combustion, electrification is simply efficient, clean, as well as being climate friendly. So these are inevitable trends, and we have the technologies to electrify nearly everything. So this is going to happen. Renewable is going to be a big part of our economy. If you think about your bills and you're adding your heating bill and your electricity bill, that is the amount of resources that households and businesses are going to put into this ecosystem. And the question then is, what role do rural areas want to play in this? Now, there's an obvious first role, which is the siting of the locations where renewables are going to be producing electricity. That's going to be overwhelmingly in rural areas. So this is on the left column, you have the different countries, the size of space that is appropriate for renewable production. And then the bars, the colorful bars in the middle, they say that, you know, the vast majority is in rural areas. Some is in towns and it is in cities, rooftop solar, of course, etc. But overwhelmingly, the siting of the renewable production will be in rural areas. But how fast this happened, where this happened, but importantly, how this happens, depends what happens on the local area. We have, this is what we're working on. Let me give you this timeline of complicated EU policy making. We have this spatial planning, which is a system where in the first stage areas are sort of assessed, and renewable acceleration areas, for example, are designated as areas particularly appropriate for particular renewable production. All this happens, it offers possibilities of participation. These are changing at the moment, and so this is really a good. So currently, the designation of RAs is being finalized, but we have a new system which is evolving. We have this large chunk of the economy which is going to be related to renewables, and the question really is, are rural areas going to get involved? And I'm going to argue there's a whole spectrum of how this could happen. Some things might be a lot less of the value generation of the sector will occur in the places. You might just have the siting by capital intense legacy utilities. So power companies, they have their staff in cities, and rural areas are kind of just the place where the renewable electricity is sort of mined or harvested. So that of course changes how the renewables, of course, it profits, but you know the value that's generated, where this flows. Yeah, so you can have citizens energy projects where it goes to a specific group of citizens. You can have obligations that the municipality receives a tax, and then where does this money go? Do you use it to fund infrastructure, etc.? But there is a potential for this value generation, which is cited in rural areas, that much more of that also remains in the rural areas and can help regenerate them. So here's some examples, I think, that haven't been thought through yet entirely. Agri-PV is something, so combining agriculture with photovoltaic. There's lots of experiments, there's lots of ideas. It's done partially, but I think which crops are suitable, where, what is the business model, what is the ownership structure, all this, there's not a sort of go-to place on this at the moment yet. So I think that's very interesting. Home PV, I think we mustn't forget that this is going to change the sort of home economics quite a lot, and might, so for example, transport costs might be much lower in a world where electricity is, for example, often free at lunch. This might change the attractiveness of rural areas. This is also a part of rurality, is people living there and maybe working somewhere else. That might affect house prices. Of course, if agri-PV and these systems, depending on how it's done, this might affect prices for agricultural land. So there is a great potential, but we need to think it through, and ideally we need to have some kind of a vision. And with that, just about on time.
I'm trying to be a bit provocative in order to create discussion and some maybe even say this is not true what he's saying, because we always tell the usual nice stories, how beautiful is life and how good projects and how good rural tourism and how good we don't really reach the real points where to act. So the challenges for the topic we're talking about, nature, cultural-based tourism, in general, I dare say, well, these are the two main resources anyway when we talk about rural areas usually. You have all the challenges well formulated in the policy document, in the previous document, background document that was made available. I'm not even repeating them or telling them because it's all there. But, and this is where I come in from practice, from a provider organization, we are tourism industry, let's say. We are not tourism planning. We are the ones that represent services on the ground. In fact, I'm right now in Austria at the General Assembly of the Austrian Farm Holiday structure. So we are the providers. And there's 3 points that I'm missing always in theoretical documents. That is, how does it work in practice? It's all nice to see what is missing, but we have 3 things that we always should look at when we think about what can we do with cultural assets, with nature assets, with territory, with people. The first thing, tourism is fun. We are talking about a customer. We are not doing it for our own interest. We're doing it for somebody to come, and he wants fun. He doesn't want problems. I will go through all of these in more detail in a moment. The second one, of course, it has to be business for someone. It doesn't help to create structures if there's no business model behind. Things need maintenance, things need to produce, and things need to sound in the pocket of people. Otherwise, they will not last. They will last, as we know from many EU projects, as long as the project financing is there, and then the whole thing stops. And that's, as you know, 90% of cases, if not more. And last but not least, when we talk about tourism in rural areas, we have dispersed services. They are not concentrated like in an urban model. So we need a management on the ground. So I'll go a bit more in detail in these 3 ones. First of all, fun. A visitor doesn't come to hear about rural problems. He doesn't want to hear about how hard life is. He doesn't want to hear how bad the roads are. He'll find that out himself. He comes to relax, to discomplicate his life, escape from his daily life pressures, escape from his problems, say, okay, I have them at home, I leave them. So first, rural problems, not for them. Don't even mention it. Rural romantics, and this can be provocative, yes. I'm not saying we need to create an artificial Heidi Park, but there are certain things that visitors have in mind when they think about rural areas, positive things, and the more we build on them and we use them for promoting and for structuring a product, the better to attract. If we don't attract the attention, they will never come. Once we have them, we can teach them something new. But if they don't come at all, it doesn't help if we are so sincere and so good and tell them all the truth. No, we need to cheat it a little bit from time to time. Not lie, but not tell the full story. Important thing, I have a link, so I guess this is distributed afterwards. Always look at social and cultural megatrends in Europe or worldwide. These trends are where people want to escape from. So a very good strategy to look into what can I do with my territory, what are the potentials here, is to check the trends. This link, you have some for European situation, but they are widely the same worldwide. Each trend creates a challenge for people that have to change, because trends mean something is changing to what I have now. They create challenge, they create an insecurity and a potential stress. So if we in tourism want to give this fun, take this trend and look, how can we do something that keeps this person calm about it, that goes against this trend. Example, massification in urban areas, urbanization. Well, contrary of that, give you space, free areas, personal contact in rural areas. This is this contra positioning of our service to what the problems and the pressures are for the visitor. So these points, well, it's some bullet points why this is fun. I will not go into this. Next one was Next one is business. Now, sustainability is always environmental and social and the impacts, etc., etc. But the main thing is all this works only if somebody earns money with it. And I'm sorry that I might be a bit challenging with this thing. It has to sound in the pocket of individual stakeholders. If it doesn't return in the pockets, if it doesn't make people see that they can earn something, they can make a living, and they are better off than they were before, the nicest models will not work. It's all beautiful and nice to create a new idea, and everybody's enthusiastic at the beginning. As soon as they find out I have to spend time, and this time I could spend in something else that produces me income, while here I'm just spending it for don't know. So in the end, you stop doing it. So please, always, I mean, not immediate, not getting rich in 10 days, but there needs to be a business model behind. There needs to be a sustainable part also in how does it work financially with resources and who will benefit from this in a way that it's a positive motivation to keep the idea, to keep the project, to keep the activity going. So, as I say, we have a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. There is a high impact, both positive and negative. So don't deny there's are negative things that can happen, which are precisely at risk if you make too much business that you come to over tourism, and this is already happening in some rural areas, yet in very few. But look at Malaga, look at Barcelona, look at Venice. What happens if it gets out of control? So we need to think about this. So we need to think and organize before we do something, and we need rules, but it has to be in a way that it's easy to handle for the small provider. A rural tourism provider in any kind of services, be it core service, accommodation, and gastronomy, be it cultural interpretation, be it health or well-being, wellness, etc., they're all small companies. They cannot deal with hundreds of regulations, limits, can't do this, can't do that, need this permission, need that position. I just heard an example in Austria today for allowing an Austrian farm to have accommodation, small, simple beds built into trees, strong trees, and you have like a tree house, like we did as kids, 12 years until they got the planning permit. 12 years. I mean, this is killing. So point here clearly, keep it as easy, as simple, leave space, don't try to control everything, let people try. If they fail, okay, but if you from the beginning ask too much, they will not even try doing things. How to solve this, and I will come to this in the policy recommendation. Support services, external services, help them. Don't do it for them, but help them doing it so they can concentrate on the main thing, which is providing their service. And don't have to do 20 other things that have nothing to do just because some administration thought you need to do this or that or look for this information. No, get organized on the ground, and that's it. Third point, management. You talk with a service provider, be it of any kind, in rural areas, and there's usually the thing, well, my place is of course the best, no doubt about that, and all the others, I prefer to tell a person that's calling at me and I'm full, not to tell him that my neighbor has something open, because he may decide to go there next time. Competition, and that's the wrong understanding, because from the perspective of the visitor, of the potential visitor, the more variety is in the place, the more different things you have in accommodation, in service, in gastronomy, in landscapes, in routes, the more you have, the more attractive gets the place, because people have the idea, visitor has the idea, I have a choice. I'm not going to one place, one service, even if it's a medium, bigger one, hotel, is usually not able to offer the full scale of additional services that keeps people staying for more than 1 or 2 nights. So you need this cooperation in the territory, and you need it through an entity that does this. And this brings us to the term of destination management organizations, DMOs. This sounds very like big regions. I would invite everybody to look at the model they have been running in Austria for 40 years, based on local associations, local obligatory participation. Everybody has to be there. They have a small tourist tax. This finances the system, and the whole money is used by the organization, reinvesting again into the tourism sector with infrastructure, with information campaigns, with whatsoever. And it brings all the small stakeholders together to work together under one organization umbrella. For the visitor, this means whatever goes wrong, the weather is bad, the DMO organizes something for the kids. You can be sure you will not be bored, everything will work. So these DMO will be very important in the future for rural areas, for rural tourism, nature, culture-based tourism, etc., etc. I just put this slide. You may have seen this somewhere, because I'll come to the next point, some critical points at the end. So don't do too much planning. I know this is a lovely thing for local authorities and for rural development agencies, and they plan and plan and plan and plan, and they have too many people planning and too many time planning, and until something is done in the end, first, the problem is not there anymore. Second, it's not what was really needed in the beginning. And third, you killed the initiative of some people on the way who is just frustrated and drops out. So planning the minimum. And now we come to the question that was raised to me: what does it mean for policy making? Of course, talking about EU policy making, when we talk about things that are needed on the ground in rural areas, is very difficult, because it's very practical. While for the national action plans, we will need more generic. But I try to focus on a couple of things that I think are from practice are enabling factors, if they can be introduced in policy making. Always following KISS: keep it simple and stupid. Lovely term. As simple as possible. First thing: reduce overhead, extra work for anybody involved in the tourism generation, in the value chain. Simple regulation, quick processing, externalization of efforts. I commented this before. Allow people to concentrate on the core service they're providing. Don't put them into doing everything themselves, because they will not have the time to do what they really can do. Capacity building, training, advisory services, mentorship. I would go especially on the advisory services, done through local structures, done through local action groups, done through professional associations that know the reality, they know their people, they know the territory, they are working on the ground, and they can very quickly react, because they have the connection to wider, bigger structures at national level or even international level, to get the information quick if something is needed. So capacity building, on one side, of course, training activities, but very strongly go into advisory services. This brings us to support mechanisms, which are basically in the line of advisory services. Very much focus on SCOs, or the simple cost option grants, lump sums, unit costs, etc., when you finance something. Avoid paperwork. Delegate and support professional associations if they do work. If they are just sitting there for lobbying, forget them. But if they do practical work, they know things better than an administration. They know things better. They know reality better than somebody in a ministry or in a faraway regional capital. So work with them, delegate them certain competencies in quality control, in standards, in standard control, in training. Both sides win. They will structure you the services on the ground and in the sector, and you will have to do less under direct political responsibility when you're in the administration. Next thing, branding. Branding helps a lot. when we talk about nature specifically, we have this Natura 2000 thing, which is on the market for more than 20 years, and it is not used as a brand. Many nature lovers know the term, but it has not been possible so far. And there wasn't a project 20 years ago already, I have to say, we tried to do this, to make a product out of this. Somehow it doesn't work. But these kind of things, to jump on something that people know, that give a clear message what to expect, and then build your real service around that. It can be, as I comment here for Natura 2000 as an example. Other things are, of course, an established destination. Just talking with colleagues from Italy here the other day, if you are in Toscana, you don't have a problem to be visible on the market. If you are in Basilicata, you have quite a problem because people don't know it. So branding helps, and the stronger branding you can get with a unique selling point, the better. And the fifth one, to focus, as I commented before, destination management structures. They are not very strong in general in European countries. They are sometimes well organized, sometimes not organized at all. If you have time, look at the Austrian model. It is definitely, to my understanding, and I know a couple of them, it is maybe not the easiest, but it's definitely the one that really works with resources, with guaranteed resources, with a control run by the tourism community at the local level, making sure that the funds that are raised through tourist tax, through VAT charges, etc., are again invested into the infrastructure and the services for the tourism in the territory. And that's the main thing. Because frequently when you talk about a tourism tax, it disappears somewhere in the municipality and is used for other things that have nothing to do with tourism. And then the whole thing gets discussable. So look at the destination management structure, look at Austrian model, and focus on user experience. Think what the customer needs. You see a design and you see what users really do in reality. Be sure the client will find the way for the things he or she wants to do. Regardless what you try to sell him, he will either not buy it at all, or will he start buying and then doing something else. So rather listen before and design, looking where's the market, where's the demand. So I put some questions, and that's the last slide, just for discussion. We have a lot of good intentions in all these EU projects, in all these structures. Everybody's nice, everybody's beautiful as long as the EU money is there. The way to hell is paved with good intentions. My first question, do we really read so much planning when we talk about small initiatives? Would it not be better to just give them a chance to try and then help them and then see where it goes? The second thing, we always talk about a new tourism model, not the mass thing anymore, style Rimini, style Torremolino, style mass tourism, back to communities, back to decentralized integration with the community. Does it work with the old framework that is still in the mind of public administrations, public tourism administrations, regarding regulations, regarding requirements, regarding paperwork, or do we need a change here as well? We cannot have a small-scale system with rules based for big corporations. It just doesn't work. Fourth point, tourism can lay golden eggs in rural areas, but we need a good diet for it. If we overfeed the hen, it will just grow fat and lazy. If we do not provide enough food, it will not lay eggs because there's no energy. So we need this mix. What is this mix of intervention and just laissez-faire to allow the whole thing to prosper? And the last question is the one that comes from the slide that I just showed you before with the picture. Always ask ourselves, it's a nice idea to do this and that, but who will buy it? Is there demand for it? And if we find out there is little demand, but we think it's a potential, then please be aware to catch the visitor first with something different that you know is demanded and you know is requested and you know you will get a response. And once you have caught the visitor to your territory, then you can use and show him something else which he would never buy from the start if you would only sell that. He will like it or not, you can experiment, but please bring them, be professional, bring people in with what they want to buy and not what you want to sell. I hope I was sufficiently provocative. I'm not expecting that everybody agrees, but I think a bit food of thought is on the table, and I will remain in the room for some 20 minutes, then I have to go.
Okay, so what I want to share a bit fast is a bit the experience, okay, from a research project that I coordinated in the Polytechnic University of Valencia with European scope, okay, about access to services in lagging or regions with special needs. First, I'm going to give you the a bit a general overview on the broad aspects that the project addressed at European level, but then I think it's more interesting to use a case study out of the many that we have as an illustrative example of some challenges and inspiring solutions. Okay, so, well, the first context, okay, is that in the European Union, we are seeing that access to services is growing up on importance. Why? Because it's a pillar of our system of social rights, because it's important for well-being, okay? And as you can see, is one of the, we can see it in the pillar of social rights, okay? But every time we are also focusing more to quality. So the matter is not just access, but also the quality of services, because actually when we live in a place with some basic services, our life is more simple, okay, to put it just clear. But what to do in areas where service delivery is difficult, because there is not so much people living, because it's expensive to provide services, because we have sometimes, if we have experienced in economic crisis, also budget cuts, okay? So the point is, a territorial perspective on access to service is important, okay? But until now, we didn't have many territorial information on access to services. And one of the objectives of the project was to provide territorial information. The focus of the project were these 5 services: healthcare, education, social services, understood as nursing, as childcare before school, and also nursing homes, but also obviously transport and some private services as access to retail and commercial services. On the other hand, we wanted also to identify some innovative, unconventional, and experimental options to provide solutions. So this was also an objective. So here just a broad overview in case you have interest. This is the map of our case studies. We identified 32 good practice examples on different services, and we also did 5 in-depth case studies, okay? So in case you are interested on services, here you may find some inspiring examples, but on the other hand, we did also a pan-European analysis, okay? And I just want you to show this map. We took 8 types of services, and we try to map the travel time to these facilities, okay? So we identified which facilities were, let's say, accessible in a reasonable time, no? Depending on the type of service. We consider reasonable different things, okay? But childcare, 15 minutes, because it's a proximity service. But some services as hospitals, obviously, they are more central services, so it's reasonable to have them farther. And we try to identify which areas, okay, are poorly served with respect to access to services. And we wanted, in this map and in this analysis, to provide a, let's say, a multi-sectoral perspective. Why? Because when we deal with access to services and at policy level, okay, normally the approaches to deal with healthcare is quite sectoral. So we focus on health centers and hospitals. Then when we look at education, planners and managers plan education, but in the reality, the people living in the areas, they don't use sectoral approaches, okay? So for example, if you live in an area where the school closes, to the village not so far away, it may not be a problem, okay? But if the school closes, the shop closes, then the doctor starts to being there, then we start to have really more problems, okay? And how to say, more push out effects of the area, okay? So the idea is that with this overview of no, this multi-layered overview, we wanted to capture where areas are experiencing more problems in this perspective, okay? Experiencing really, and why we wanted to do that? Because this helps us also identify areas that could be target areas from a policy perspective. Why? Because when you have just, for example, one doctor there what was for the doctor, 30 minutes, one school there in 15 minutes, you could identify these areas as target areas to have some specific situations where the school shouldn't be closed. Because it will have more impact than, for example, in another place, okay? So we tried to do that. We did some recommendations with respect to that, okay? But now let me go to another example, jump from this pan-European perspective to deal with these challenges in a more applied way, okay? So I'm going to show you an example of territorialized healthcare, okay? So an example of dealing with these challenges, okay? Why? If we look at healthcare in rural areas have many challenges, some geographic, because we have few facilities, public transport is usually limited. Obviously, when you are far away from big cities, this is an issue in case of emergency and also for more specialized services, okay? Like when you want to go to the cardiologist or other more specific healthcare, okay? But on the other hand, when we look at local healthcare, okay, there is usually a scarcity of staff. There is difficulties, rural areas experiences difficulties to attract staff that stays there in the long term. There is high rotation of professionals, and obviously having less population served usually seen as having obviously a high cost of service provision because a doctor is attending less people, okay, usually. And normally this overlays with sparsity, okay, and also with aging populations, which normally deserve even more resources, okay? So we see these specific problems that happens to many services in the case of healthcare, okay? But for example, when we look at health, a very basic service, one of the most important in our quality of life, we see that having, for example, a sustained relationship over time with health professional has impacts on health. So it has impacts on the quality of life. And some studies, okay, have found that having the same family doctor for 15 years or more decreases by 30% visits to emergency care, decreases by 28% hospital admissions, and decreases by 26% mortality. Okay, so we can get an idea of the importance of improving healthcare for quality of life in concrete terms, okay? But then we have some questions. Okay, is the conventional way of providing healthcare, which is usually designed from a urban perspective, working in rural areas? How can we address health in an integral way? Because health is not just our doctor, but it's doctor, social life, activities, okay, some community healthcare that is also included there, okay? And how can we overcome the problem of sectoral approaches and its cumulative effects? For example, I mean, when you don't have a doctor close, but public transport works bad, okay? Because then the effect of having poor transport is also influencing healthcare, okay? So these things overcome and the effects of that are clear on the cost and time that citizens in more rural areas, okay, have to access the same type of services. To some extent, we may find this normal. We all know that we cannot have the same level of services for some services in a remote rural area than in a big city. But, okay, what can be done to improve service delivery in rural areas? And I want to give you an example because it's interesting, okay, the case of Spain, and specifically of one rural area in the region of Valencia is an illustrative example of how to deal with some of these limitations in an effective way. Okay, so this is what we call a health service area, okay? So it's an administrative area for healthcare at regional level, managed by the region, and it's a rural area, so there are not really big cities in the area. It's one of the rural areas that is quite far from any big city. So how is the healthcare organized here? As you can see, okay, the red stars are what we call primary health centers. Okay, in Spain, we have there doctor, nurse, pediatricians, and midwives, okay? Even in those cases, they are reference health care centers, so they provide service for urgency needs, sometimes 24/7, okay? But what you can see in green is that the population lives very much dispersed, okay? So as these health centers are quite far away from some places where the population lives, in this area, they have a territorial approach to provide healthcare that is, in these green stars, we have some services, okay? So, for example, if you live in one of these green stars, okay, you are having doctor services, even if you are living in a very dispersed and small population, but obviously you are having access to doctor, let's say, in a less intensive way. For example, you may have a doctor that provides you service just once a week, okay, or 2 days per week, or even half a morning in some cases, okay? So there is an organization of itinerant doctors that travel one day to a village, another day to another village, another day to another village. The same with nurses providing some services. And when there are children or pregnant women, which is not always the case due to challenges with the population, you may have also pediatricians and midwives passing even sometimes once every 2 weeks. What is important about that? Okay, we forgot the urban perspective, okay, of you travel half an hour to come to the doctor, okay, but we say, okay, the municipality has a facility, the region puts the doctor, and there is all this service kind of optimized, okay, to provide access to doctors. Obviously, if you have an urgency, you end up driving 30 minutes to the big hospital of the area, okay? But it's true that for many regular things that can be arranged and programmed, this is already providing access to health, okay, for not urgent things. So this is the first thing of how this territorial service works, okay? As you can see, it's quite impressive, okay? But then let's look at the other side of the problem in rural areas, emergency access, okay? In this area, I don't think I can use, look here, yes, I can. For example, imagine that you have here the big city, okay, in yellow, and here the other big city, okay? The area that is really having more problems with emergency services is what is in the middle, because it's the people experiencing more travel time problems, okay, to access, let's say, more specific healthcare services. Okay, in this healthcare center, you may have some services. In the others, no, sorry, the hospital is here. There. But what happens with the areas in the middle, or even in these areas that are far away? Okay, so they try to look at the problem not with a urban approach. They say, okay, and I go to the next slide. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay. We have here the two big points are ambulances, okay? Ambulances need to have a lot of people living there to have what is called an advanced ambulance, okay? You cannot have an ambulance for a small village, okay? So ambulances are there, and what happens to the rest of the people? The blue circles are basic ambulances, which are good to drive you fast to a hospital and keep you alive, but they don't provide you advanced services, okay? They just drive you to the hospital with advanced services. But in the middle, in these two, sorry that I put them a bit difficult to see, in these two crosses in orange, you can see the areas that are really struggling to have emergency services in case of a vital emergency, okay? So they tried in this region to rethink the service, and they say, okay, what is the problem? To go to the hospital. What is the problem? Sorry, because somebody is phoning me all the time. And 1 second, sorry. Okay. And then they said, okay, what can we do? And they decided to do to think the problem the other way around. And they said, okay, let's train the basic healthcare staff to provide advanced services in case of emergency, maybe until we can send there a helicopter when there is really an urgent emergency. And they realized that there are also problems with when they phone the emergency services, to react. Okay, so they said, okay, another problem is communication. So they redefine the emergency care protocols of the regions to deal with such remote areas. And they said, okay, maybe we cannot communicate with a hospital there by phone, but we need a radio system because maybe we have a nurse there in a regular day basis, but normally it's not a specialized nurse. Let's train the nurse, let's provide them the equipment that an advanced ambulance have, and like this we can save lives, okay? So instead of thinking in a urban way, we redefine the system, okay? And this is how they improve advanced emerging care in areas that normally would be really difficult from an economic perspective to have sub-services, okay? But then the point is it okay, does it cost a lot of money? Because this is always the question, okay? And then we were looking at the cost of providing healthcare in the region and comparing with the other healthcare areas in the region, okay? And we can see that primary care there actually is a bit more expensive than in other areas because obviously you are having more staff, okay? But if we compare, for example, secondary care, it's more or less around the same level of service. We need also to consider that probably in this area the population is more aged, okay? So this also has an influence on the cost, okay? But the difference is not huge because, for example, a urban area is having other urban areas, okay, are having similar costs. But obviously in primary care, it has an impact. In secondary care, we see levels which are similar, okay, to other areas. Obviously, pharmacy prescription is larger, but this is related to aging more than to other stuff, okay? And then let's see, okay, so we can see that it's slightly more expensive, but when we look, for example, at the cost of health in a European context, I don't want you here to look at the details, okay? But I want you to look at the total cost of healthcare expenditure. If you compare Spain in green, okay, with the average of the European Union in blue, and for example, with other countries, okay, we can see that as a percentage of the GDP, Spain is below the European average. We can see that total healthcare is below European average. And for example, we can see that the region of Valencia is below the average in physicians per 1,000 inhabitants as compared to Spain. Okay, so what we can see is that we are not incurring, there are European health systems much more costly that provide a quite worse territorial level of service coverage, okay? And this, we can be proud of that, and we can see it clearly. I experienced that in first person. For example, I have been living in France, And I can tell you that they have the same problems and the solutions are probably more expensive and providing a worse access level, okay? So the point is sometimes it's a matter of rethinking the service in a perspective to improve efficiency considering the constraints of rural areas, as it was the case here with healthcare, okay? What can we learn? Okay, that more equal accessibility can be provided with balanced territorial healthcare models, and Valencian region is not comparably expensive in Spain and in Europe, okay? So sometimes it's a matter of rearranging staff and not all this rearranging is costly, okay? The importance is also to think and rethink services in an integral way, okay? And when I think in an integral way, sometimes I think arranges between transport and other services, between also healthcare and other social services, sometimes finding multi-service solutions, okay? So if you want to have some insights on how to support policy development to improve essential services, okay, in this scale project, we also analyze 5 pathways to provide solutions. Okay, the first one is using a multi-angle approach to provide tailored and equitable service delivery. The other is, in our case study, we found that strengthening community engagement and ownership was also quite effective in many examples. That is important to build resilient and sustainable service models, diversifying funding sources, integrating technologies, okay, and also strengthening governance through collaborative approaches, okay. We also found that data-driven spatial planning can also help to improve access to services. So these were our main insights after analyzing all these cases. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you have some inspiring insights, and in case you want more information or to know more, you can write me, and here you have project website and all the people that participated in this study. Thank you very much.
I think we're going to do a bit of a recap of what has been discussed in each of the sessions. There will be a reporter per session. I don't know if maybe Maria would like to start off, and then I don't remember now the order, if you allow me, but correct me if I'm wrong.
It's okay, I can go. I was still organizing my ideas because it's really difficult to bring that into me. I will be very brief because we've been on the energy transition and climate neutrality breakout group, and we have identified like few challenges, incentives for this energy transition, technical assistance, and some governance mechanisms to make sure that local and rural realities are kind of reflected. So what also we identified what's working at local level, which is actually providing context-specific solutions and piloting. So having the capacity of rural areas to explore and to engage in this energy transition. Some of the current gaps in the EU framework and policy would be these financial mechanisms to reward the rural areas to actually, when they're not used, they merely use as hosts and not as actors for energy transition. So having these financial mechanisms to be rewarded by that. And also there are like many, oftentimes in these areas where nature is very valuable, some regulatory aspects might limit the activities or make the rural areas go very, to have very specific guidance to deploy some activities. So we came up with few ideas, but basically like have the capacity to fund energy transition facilitators, also pre-application and feasibility funding as a rule, to be able to do these community engagement, do these early feasibility studies before these energy projects happen in rural areas. And some others, but I will be too long, so I think that was
Thank
more or less
you,
the core
thank
of
you,
our
Maria.
discussion.
And sorry for cutting you off. It was just we just jump into the session, and I didn't see the order of the agenda. You were the third, so you were rightly to be Coco. My apology. You did very well. I think we're gonna go back to the order we have agreed. So now he wouldn't be surprised to be called up on reporting back, Mr. Janne Sinnerma, previous project manager of RURACTIVE, so well known to many colleagues here. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Serafin. My room was the culture and cultural innovation breakout session. We had a very nice and lively discussion during our session, and we identified actually several challenges and bottlenecks that hinder the development of culture and cultural innovation activities in Europe. First of all, there are still the strong siloed effect of urban and rural actions, that a lot of money and a lot of capacity are going to the city center or municipal centers or capital regions, and rural areas are not as often identified as a strong innovators of cultural activities and actions. And also the other challenge in relation to this is the cultural networks, that there are perhaps not enough opportunities to participate for rural areas. And then there is the continuation problem regarding cultural actions. For example, if you are holding a festival or any kind of rural innovation, that they are often going stop and start, right? So they get funding, and funding, ends, and everything stops, and then it starts again and starts again and starts again. So there are no there are not strong enough continuation on the cultural innovation and actions that it should be. So one of the suggestions that we've been thinking about was to somehow have stable funding sources for cultural actions, considering rural areas and peri-rural areas, not just only urban areas. And also one idea that was thought about was that the stronger recognition of rural areas as a source of cultural innovators and cultural actions. So it's bi-directional contribution at rural areas are not just static beneficiaries from urban area actors, but actually contributing a lot on cultural innovations around Europe. And this comes down to the thinking of functional areas, that rural areas are part of our ecosystem, and not, we should abolish the division between rural and urban areas in a way that they are interconnected with each other. But these are the discussions we had.
Thank you. I will also take the chance to acknowledge the contribution of Professor Maria João Horta Parreira from University of Lisboa, as the contributor for this session, as is right to be of Luke Haywood, Head of Climate and Energy, the European Environmental Bureau, who spoke at the energy transition that Maria facilitated. Now we continue with the order we had set, so I will be keen to give the floor to our colleague Blanca Casares, which I believe had like a very popular session, perhaps the most popular session of the lot, with a session that was had the keynote contribution of Professor Ian Baker from the University of Birmingham. So without further ado, Blanca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will summarize some of the ideas that were a lot. Well, our core idea was to build an ecosystem of influence to transform agriculture into a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient system. And small farmers were in the discussion several times. Then I will give some of the proto recommendations that we were discussing, but having in mind that several are involving this scale of small farmers and the relevance in the rural development, in ecosystem services, and so on. We had different interventions on the status of the farmers, the recognition, the image that we have, then the revalue the farming, position farmers as ecosystem stewards and ecosystem service providers, not just food producers. And this will have an implication on the social status and attract young people and influencing the generational renewal. We have different ideas for the questions that we discuss in the group on knowledge and advice, then create local holistic advisory systems for business, digital cooperation, agroecology, with peer-to-peer learning and the reality of the needs of the territory. Fair access to finance, May funding, and here public and private, simple and more inclusive, especially for small farmers with micro grants or other kind of loans, and also eligible criteria within the different CAP interventions for this scale, and also on digitalization, thinking on the inclusive digitalization, and also technology is not like an end, but as a way of achieving some results, close the digital gap with more integration, co-design format between farmers and policymakers, training, and also collaborative model. It means supporting the adoption of technologies, not for individuals, but for cooperative models. And with the perspective of the whole workflow, from the design of interventions, the production, to the marketing, but also monitoring the achievements and so on. We had a discussion on regulate, protect the agricultural land, the regulated land use, reserve agri use, and to ensure access to land. And we were discussing this EU Observatory of Farmland and possible figures that are existing already at regional national level. All these figures through cooperatives and long-term stewardship of the territory. And we had also as a recommendations the public procurement, the demand for local and sustainable foods, the support of with context-sensitive criteria for procurement, tenders, and funding, supporting local market and direct sales, and to end the reward farmers for biodiversity, soil health, water outcome, and not only practices, but the environmental results.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we move on to nature-based and cultural tourism, which our colleague Merve Tapovashi, she will be providing the reporting back, and of course take the chance to acknowledge the contribution of Klaus Ehrlich, Secretary General of Rural Tour. So without further ado, Merve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Serafin. So I was in the nature-based and cultural tourism tour group, sorry. And so one of the key challenges that emerged from the discussion, and also coming from the presentation that was given by Klaus, was that there is quite a lot of over-planning, which is killing the local initiatives that are about to emerge. And the other challenge was that there's also a need to better understand the visitor needs, although some participants highlighted that talking to visitors is important, but it can also happen that we can also develop other ideas that customers don't know that they need, but that can emerge as well. So the conclusion that we had in terms of the challenge on tourism is that sometimes done is better than being perfect. And then, we also had some examples of practices that are already taking place in some areas around Europe. So we had participants who gave the example from Scotland on the a map of visitor guides for an area in Scotland that is not experiencing over tourism. And that example is part of the RURACTIVE Dynamo. And then we had an example coming from Italy of micro planning, which is the use of a system to decrease the planning and to share small bites on how to plan. And this responds directly to the challenge of a planning that was already highlighted. And then there was also the question of collecting data and to make sure that we put money in the challenges and in the services that people need. And for that, we need to collect as much data as possible to understand where are the gaps. And so in terms of the gaps in the current EU policy and funding frameworks, Klaus gave an example of the European Commission group on funding for tourism that already exists, but where the majority of the funds are distributed by national organizations, which can lead to additional burdens. And so in the discussion, we highlighted the need that to make a difference, we need to have more simplified cost options and funding options. There's also a need for increased resources when it comes to languages and to mentoring. And then also to introduce a funnel of funds, which is to make the research not only at the implementation phase, but also at the beginning when deciding what type of tourism is needed in different areas. And also make more approaches to local actors by taking into account the different challenges in the different areas across Europe, and to support the different sources of funding, including from business support organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very comprehensive and incredible note taking because you got a lot of level of detailing in a very short time between the end of the meeting and you reporting back. Let me move on now to Raquel, as she will be reporting back on local services. I take the chance to acknowledge once again Professor Mar Ortega from the University Politécnica Valencia, as she was delivering precisely as a very significant ESPON project on access to service, one of the key things that we are discussing at European level at the moment. So without further ado, Raquel, the floor is yours.
Yes, we were discussing, first of all, different challenges that rural areas face for local service, time, aging, digital exclusion, social isolation, but also the specific in elderly people. We also include in this first list of challenges social inclusion, but not in terms of geographic access, but also in the social dimension, including the equal rights of all people to foster the inclusiveness. But also we also discussed that those challenges are interconnected, and this also a vicious cycle. We all know the different elements, but the key point was on how do we keep people in rural areas and how to make attractive territories, including all the local service. To foster or to the different pathways to foster innovation for local services, we discussed that digital and technologies could be a complement, that is not the main core or focus. But also we highlight the importance of community. Mar presented different initiatives, and one of the key findings was that small initiatives in small territories show that they are effective in the local dimension, in the local policies. Other element was to foster private-public partnership, starting with small initiatives from the private side, to show regional and local authorities how these initiatives work to contribute to the solutions, trying to light or how to present different options where resources are finite. Other element mentioned was also introduced in the initial presentation of the forum, the need to talk among different ministries and administrations, avoiding silos and embed the focus of rural dimension, because health is also transport, connectivity, funds, so including rural sensitive criteria in EU and national regional dimension. For the recommendations, we mentioned about more flexibility in EU fundings, including a specific assessment and precise evaluation of the local challenge, ensuring ensuring the participation of all agents. And the other one is trying to foster the initiatives that already have been working, not just as a technical project, but also how the different competencies on managing authorities from regional and local level have been working, what can do, what is possible, or what has not been working, and we can learn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will be, again, great summary of a complex topic in not always never enough time to cover all of that. I just gonna do a bit of a quick debrief on the transport, rural transport, essentially, acknowledging Pedro Amigo de Gouveia, head of policy in Polis, the Pan-European Transport Network, and the excellent ideas that he put us to focus the debate. I will use my Miro board, which is, you can see, very sophisticated tool. But I help it to track down quite a few very, very rich debate, very engaging debate. I hope to acknowledge all the names that were contributed. But Pedro, of course, given the ongoing work on transport poverty, the topicality of the concept, focus a lot of that. I think the issue of important is transport poverty means it doesn't mean poverty. You can be rich or having money and still have transport poverty because you don't have a choice of transport. You don't have. You cannot drive a car for whatever health, knowledge reasons. You live in an area there is no off-peak travel. It's an area of low density. So there's been those choices imposed on you that prevent you from having choice. That's essentially in a very short nutshell what transport poverty is and how it is defined in legal terms for the first time at European level, which is one of the most important legal definitions we had over the years in terms of rural development and territorial cohesion coming from Europe. Transport poverty is about ending the transport monoculture and ensure diversity to meet diversity of needs. Essentially, the ability to do choice and efficiency. And when you do efficiency, you increase affordability and reliability of services. And interestingly enough, Pedro was talking. A lot of Pedro Polis members are public authorities, transport authorities, but interestingly enough, he was talking about shared mobility because there are so many places that, mass transport or high density transport, let alone just relying on cars, is not enough. So you need to think about shared vehicles and shared trips. And then you need matching digital platforms, right by demand. So you can actually have a mix between an offer that will get paid for the service, a demand, pay less, and you got a service. You got a platform that perhaps also gets some money and matches the needs and the supply and offer. And you got public regulation, which is not just to get like some media tycoon from Palo Alto in California sorting out your mobility problems in the Upper Silesia or Galicia for that matter. So that's important that the public authority cannot just simply contract that out or just essentially rely on massive investment coming from Europe on, for instance, the Social Climate Fund or some of the transport funds to sort out what it is a public policy issue. Another issue that was highlighted, for instance, one of the things that is others, sometimes it's just small solutions like having a village car. That was mentioned already in the previous meeting of the forum. That in some countries in Eastern Europe, there is a village car that can actually use for everybody that needs it. Another thing is cycling. And that's something that if you are in Brussels or in Northern Europe, you start now seeing electric bikes everywhere, and you think it's like a hipster, cafe latte, matcha people, but actually no. If you live in a rural areas, that can actually revolutionize that, because you can actually get people who cannot drive or will not drive being able to use these electric bikes. And electric bikes essentially as motorbikes without a permit. They are not go down beyond 25 kilometers per hour, if I'm not mistaken. But I actually can improve the mobility. And those of us who live in rural areas can attest to that, particularly if you live in a mountain area with a lot of slopes, that actually can help a lot of people to move around, the small businesses to provide. And that doesn't mean buying, because sometimes electric bikes can be expensive. You can have leasing, you can have buying, you can have sharing. Transport poverty is a market failure, and that's something we shouldn't be forgetting. I would also like to quickly acknowledge the contribution from Andrea Lorenzini, precisely from the Rural Pact. We have a discussion earlier about the Rural Pact. There's a specific community group on transport poverty, and he particularly highlighted that we need to actually align the current discussions on transport with the vision for rural, long-term vision for rural areas, which should be essentially access to basic services in a 30-minute time scale without a car. And that's something that in some countries is being attempted, in some countries it's been talked about, and then perhaps we should be thinking, settling our policy recommendations further on how to introduce a 30% rule. The same way there are 15 minutes cities, now we can actually have a 30% municipalities or rural areas in terms of access to basic services. There is also the need of addressing gaps, like for instance the case of Valencia, Fidel Garcia mentioned, gaps between towns in terms of transport services that actually go to the main town and the village, but not between them. And that's again signals a moment of regulatory and funding gap. And I will also, just without getting too extensive, the issue of being from the Netherlands, from the Dutch province, about automated mobility. Automated mobility, which could be important not just for the robot taxis of California, of tycoons, but actually Europe exercising the leadership, technological leadership and regulatory leadership on automated mobility, but actually access in low in transport areas where actually not having a driver can actually be, if technologically and safe to do, a economically viable option. So there are things that future-proofing things that we need to actually look at. I would also like to finally acknowledge the contribution of inter alia of ULB professor who was talking about something that we just this morning was talking about in the commission, which is we need better indicators of transport, not just kilometers or many cars, buses procured, which, as Pedro mentioned, can take many years, and sometimes the solutions you don't have to procure a lot of things. You actually need to optimize the solutions that you got at hand, including your existing transport services. And that's something, the metrics that we need to look at for the future, particularly because if this National Renewable Partnership Plan is a big envelope, if the measures are too crude, is a recipe for investment in big metropolitan transport, big technological providers, and then territorial cohesion and equity being suffering as a result. As you can see, I'm very fired up with this topic, so I'm very thank you, Maria, for allocating me this session. Anyway, so just to say, before giving the floor to Maria to do a conclusion, these are useful ideas because we are developing some policy recommendations. You see some skeleton of that in the breakout sessions today. And this has been a good reality check for all of us, and that's we are thanking for the passion and the contribution for some of you. But I think it's more appropriate that Maria provide a bit of a outline where we are getting from today onwards. Thank you.
And what's happening in the future is we're going to consolidate today's outputs. So we will circulate all the outputs among the participants, and we will start producing these policy recommendations with the key messages, what the context is, what the background, some recommendations, some previous activities that we've got many examples of existing frameworks that we could actually base our recommendations in, and make sure these are all well aligned with the current situation and EU policy cycle that Serafin presented earlier. So we will do this presentation and get feedback on the policy recommendations on the next session of the forum that will take place on the 30th of June. You'll receive the information when it's ready. So we welcome you all again to see if we can fine tune these policy recommendations, these ideas that you started putting on the table today. And this will help us produce the final policy outputs of the project, which is this policy recommendations and guidance. So stay tuned, because that will be hopefully the reflection of all these ideas, both from the project itself, but also enriched with your contributions. So thank you very, very much for taking the time for being with us today.